Hello everyone, today we're going to be talking about how an aspect of the game's overarching design has changed as time has went on. Now, Adventurer, Champion, and Commander. As World of Warcraft has progressed, so has our standing in terms of how the game actually treats us. We started off the game with no idea what was going on outside of the scope of our cute little starting area. We slowly explored the world, finding towns and completing tasks for the locals. Of course, as we got more powerful, those tasks got more and more important, until we found ourselves watching the Battle of the Wrathgate, we were storming Icecrown, and taking part in countless other epic moments. Yet, for all that time, no matter how big the scale, we were pretty much always referred to by the game as adventurers. The world of Warcraft was far larger than our actual characters are, and you might wonder why I'm using these words Commander and Adventurer. Well, it's pretty simple. In times gone by, we were always referred to as Adventurer by the game, and if they were feeling really fancy, they might refer to us as Champion. But nowadays, the game's preferred word is Commander. Now, the word itself hardly matters. But for me, this switch from Adventurer to Commander sort of signifies a large and fundamental change in the design of the game. I definitely do think that the game's feel has really changed, and personal preferences aside, I'm not really saying this is an objectively bad thing, more that it's just a fun topic to chat about and consider. So, a lot of what I'm going to talk about here will cover the leveling experience, mainly of Wrath of the Lich King and Warlords of Draenor, because I think they're two excellent examples of pretty different designs. The leveling experience is often the bit where most of the lore is contained, and it really does inform the overall feel of an expansion. As always, it's worth listening to the whole video before commenting, else you're likely to get the complete wrong picture of what I'm actually saying. To be clear, I really like the leveling in both Wrath and Warlords of Draenor. And speaking of Warlords of Draenor, well, today we, as a part of the lore, are actually really significant. Now sure, we don't have a Wowpedia article, we don't have a Noble video to back that up with, but the whole story of Draenor is basically centered around our fight with the Iron Horde. Yes, it's our factions, but we are the cutting edge. It is our garrison. We have a legion of followers, and the major lore characters like Yril are very much our equals. Hell, technically they're lower down the pecking order than we are in terms of the old military ranking things. Now don't get me wrong, parts of that were really fucking cool. I mean, really cool, and it did allow for some fantastic stuff to happen. We are the main power in Draenor, and there are hardly any other friendly factions of note insofar as the post-Frostfire Ridge and Shadowmoon Valley leveling goes. But being on the cutting edge, we are the people who do all of the establishing. Bar our garrison and some of the already existing things for the Frostwolf, Orcs, and the Draenei, bases and quest hubs and things like that are actually generally quite small without a great deal of majesty. By being on the cutting edge of an expansion's lore, we actually get a very different experience. Now let's look back at what it was like to be an adventurer. When we went into Hellfire Citadel, at least on the Alliance side, we found Honor Hold, a years-old battered stronghold in the middle of a barren wasteland. Venturing into Zangarmarsh, we soon found the Draenei mushroom town of Tel'Rador. In Terracor Forest, we found Illyrian Stronghold, we found Shattrath City. In Nagrand, we found Talar. Moving into Wrath, we immediately ran into the likes of Valgard, Valence Keep, I think the other one was Westguard, you had Winterguard, and it was only really at basically Icecrown that we were really on the cutting edge of our faction's progression, where we helped Tyrion secure a foothold there. In terms of how the world was actually delivered to us, the difference is quite stark. In TBC and Wrath, by virtue of the pacing, we were given the opportunity to see a world that was already partially fleshed out by our factions. Each zone somewhat felt like it had a sort of a home. And when the place that feels like a home is also a major quest hub, it really grounds what you do in the world. It makes locations feel important rather than disposable. Instead of ploughing from one end of the zone right over to the other in a sort of semi-linear hub-to-hub manner, we actually ventured out and returned back. You really saw a lot of this in, say, the vanilla leveling. Places like Goldshire, Sentinel Hill, Darkshire, Booty Bay, Crossroads, Theramore, blah blah blah, they all really stick out in memory. That said, of course, there were lots of reasons why the vanilla leveling experience could have been improved. But a massive part of designing a game is finding a fantasy and creating content that backs it up. Adventurer and Commander are very, very different fantasies, and these differences are very much reflected in the various different iterations of World of Warcraft's leveling experience. It all comes down to what sort of feeling you want to give the player. In Warlords of Draenor, the leveling and basically all of the sort of content is about the power fantasy of being a commander. Bar the cinematics and Thrall doing his Thrall thing, you are pretty much the center of everything. In the older styles of leveling, they seem to be okay with you not being the dog's bollocks, the fucking chicken's nipples, the center of everyone's attention. You were smaller, and by virtue of being a little bit smaller and a little bit behind the cutting edge of what your faction was doing in whatever continent you were in, you ended up going through I think a larger, more established world. Combined with the less linear quest flow, I think they did a really, really good job of matching up the idea of you being an adventurer. In some of the past expansions, the power fantasy that Warlords of Draenor focuses on so much was traded in for the idea of you being a smaller scale explorer. However, sometimes even within the context of being a little bit less important within the wider world, we were still, in rare occasions, doing some really cool stuff, like securing Icecrown with Tyrion and fighting off the undead with Bolvar. They were rare events in which we were very important characters to the narrative, and I think that these moments were all the more effective due to them being a lot more rare. Now in Warlords of Draenor, those moments are constant as you literally are on the cutting edge of the world's events. To put it in other terms, you're not a part of the expedition. If we were to say, refer this back to the Northrend expedition, you're not a part of the expedition. No, you are the expedition. And I suppose that by all of these epic events and things like that being so normal, each individual moment is perhaps less successful. We are led in the world from small unestablished hub to small unestablished hub in a pretty linear fashion by our other hero friends. Those epic moments just end up being so common that you don't really feel them. Yet as a whole, the pace of the leveling never lets up in Warlords of Draenor. It throws punch after punch, always trying very hard to keep your interest. By being a commander, we really do get a vastly different experience to when we were an adventurer. And of course, everything is in degrees, and I think that Wrath of the Lich King and Warlords of Draenor had fantastic leveling experiences for completely different reasons. I do find it a bit funny that the expansion whose narrative makes you feel the least like an adventurer is the one where they added in all of the great exploration content to the leveling experience. I think that's maybe a bit odd. And personally, I think a hybrid of these two ways of doing things is the ideal solution. I would like to start every expansion off with us being a little bit less important, a part of the kind of wider alliance or horde initiative to counter whatever threat we're facing, rather than actually being that initiative. I'd like to see a return to us having zones with larger, more established hubs, which serve as our home location for a bit longer than the current ones do. But I'd also love to see the Warlords of Draenor style exploration content, though I think it should be balanced in such a way that it can't be so easily gamed for absurd experience. I'd love to have the same amount of voice acting that Warlords of Draenor has as well, and the same goes for the fantastic cinematics. I'd also like the quest flow to be a little bit less linear, and I'd also like a bit less of a singular focus. I always loved how the Wrath zones had a rich sort of Scourge presence, but also a rich Titanic presence, and this was weaved pretty much throughout every single zone. Every zone built up a stronger picture of these two threats, whereas in Warlords of Draenor, the only threat to us was the Iron Horde story. The Arakoa stuff, while enjoyable, felt kind of detached from our main objectives there. So I suppose a less singular narrative that is more about the world is of more interest to me than a specific faction of enemies. I think that approach actually lends itself better to the lore as well. As much as I enjoyed the story of Warlords of Draenor, I feel like its lore has perhaps had less depth than some of the past expansions. Another part of what made some of the past worlds feel more adventurous was the inclusion of fully fleshed out reputations that were really involved in the region's history. This especially works well when those reputations contain story quests at max level, which is something that MoP actually did quite well. So there are my loose thoughts on both the leveling process, but also this idea of whether we are a commander or an adventurer. I kind of prefer being an adventurer in a game that's so much about the world of Warcraft. I think that by being a commander and focusing on that power fantasy, really, our followers are actually the adventurers, and I think that sometimes they're the people who are having the most fun. I suppose it is as if we are the Thrall of this expansion. You know the way people kind of got a bit ticked off when Thrall was just the cutting-edge dude who did everything in Cataclysm? It feels like we're kind of fulfilling that role now. So, who knows, if things get crazy meta and it turns out our followers are actually people, maybe to them, we are the Green Jesus. Doesn't that blow your mind? But anyway, they are my loose thoughts on leveling. I really do like Wrath of the Lich King, and I think it was the best evolution of the older style of doing things. Similarly, I think Warlords of Draenor did a fantastic job in so many different regards. Since I like both things for, I think, different and very non-conflicting reasons, they could both be merged together to produce something that truly is fantastic. Now that's about as far down this rabbit hole as I want to go for now. There is probably a discussion to be had in the future about how this stuff affects the nature of endgame design, but I think this is a pretty good place to leave it for now. That is it, so I really do hope you enjoyed the video. Stuff like this is actually what I enjoy doing the most. So thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you next time.